Well, I'm going to just go right into questions from Redditors. Our first question comes from our experiencers, from the user megablockman. They ask, if you had unlimited funding and no confidentiality restrictions, what specific tests and experiments would you conduct, and on which types of samples or test subjects?
Well, it kind of ironic that you asked that. So a lot of the work that I did that came up to this point started out with Hal's organization when I was working with a medical professional. We were trying to understand why were people suffering medical conditions or having emotional conditions or having personality changes when UFOs were present. So at that point, we decided that there must be some external vector that's actually coming out into the person that's actually making this their physiology change when this high energy objects are present. So if I was to be as what would be the ultimate experiment that I'd like to get into is that I would like to take lots and lots of people that see these things and instrument them, and while they're observing this phenomena, record what's going on in the outside world. And if I can actually match a change in these electronic signals or whatever signals with what's going on in their with their narratives, say that they've seen things or they're taking photographs. I mean, when you get that's basically two sensors, right? Your body, your mind, and you have scientific instruments around you. That's two scientific data points, and that's a real data point that you can use in statistics.
Our next question comes from the experiencers subreddit from ornery size 8530. If technology is an extension of our senses and natural abilities, like Marshall McLuhan thought, I hope I pronounced that correctly, then it follows that UFO technologies are amplifying an innate ability a human being already possesses to some degree. To what degree, that is seems to be an open question right now. Do any of you have insights on that? And it would be great to hear. I mean, this one probably isn't just for Gary. I think Jim or Hal or if anybody else wants to weigh in.
One of the other guys step in there. I got to think about.
Yeah, I think if I could weigh in on this a little bit. So part of the research that I've worked on is getting information or getting narratives from a whole host of people, hundreds of people. And it always seems to be pocketed as far as, who really reports the really cool stuff, the stuff that's really deep down. And it seems that there's a certain sector of people that, like Native Americans are extremely good at this. I mean, they are very intuitive people that have done it. So a lot of that type of thing you get where, certain people seem to be just much, much better at doing or interpreting this information that's coming from this phenomena than other people. I mean, there's other people that it just washes over their head and they don't even realize it's happening. But there's other people that are just really good at understanding what it is and interpreting it and coming up with a narrative that explains it very accurately. And it seems to be, maybe not genetic or upbringing or religious background or whatever. It really is just it's amazing that there's certain groups of people that are just really good at this.
And that might be cultural because they're taught not to ignore it, or they're taught that it is part of their natural world, and so they see it. It's there've been plenty of studies of that. If you're told that something doesn't exist, you just ignore it in the environment, and I call it the mirror test. It's sort of a sign of intelligence. You put a mirror in the jungle and see which animals figure out that it's them. And so this might be a form of a mirror test. Maybe it's us figuring out that them is us.
Well, actually another interesting thing. It seems that a lot of people that have suffered some form of brain injury or some form of it doesn't have to be an injury per se. Maybe they spiked a 104 or 105 when they were younger or something like that. Seem to be much more intuitive and report a much better narrative of their situation than others. And it seems like that just washes away all of like what Gary said, the stacking of all the norms that are piled into us as we grow up and go through school and go through our education and things like that. It might strip that away. It just seems that it's very odd that there's high percentage of people that have had injuries in the past or have some conditions in the past that seem to be the ones that are much more intuitive.
I have my explanation for part of that has been, people have, some brain injury or a medical issue, and they go brain dead. And maybe what's happening is, and we now know that certain parts of the brain can reform. And so if you have damage, there's going to be neural growth, and maybe paths between parts of the brain that weren't connected before or were otherwise blocked because of just natural processes, and you've matured, and that part of the brain just gets turned off. Maybe you've grown a new connection. And I actually find those people more interesting in some ways than those who have a natural ability, because if you can look at the before and after in some way, then that tells you what it is you need to do for other people who might want it, right? That's kind of the clue to how it is that you might enable it in somebody else without them having to go through a life-threatening, heart attack or car crash.
This brings to my mind the telepathy tapes. I don't know, Gary and Jim and Hal, if you're familiar with those, but these autists, some of them adults, but autistic young people that are non-speakers who are telepathic with great ease. And it seems to be that whole group of people has this special ability. I don't know, Gary, have you thought much about that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes what I wonder about, and let's just talk about even not just telepathy, but in autistics, high functioning ability to, compute the square root of some prime number to the nth power.
Right.
And what it maybe means is that to live in this world, our brains are programmed to have certain formations. But if that, in an autistic, some aspect of their social interaction is blocked, but the brain, other than that particular block, is still trying to connect with itself, it builds a capability, or it enables the growth of a capability that would otherwise be crowded out in a normal individual. The brain always compensates.
Right.
I mean, biology compensates. And so that's the way that I think about, these telepathy tape children.
Right. Because they can't communicate verbally, so they find another way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense.
People who are blind are known to be more sensitive to motion in their environment. Many are. You basically you listen to something that you didn't pay attention to before because you were so otherwise overloaded with information from your eyes,
right,
or your ears.
Right.
In fact, in the remote viewing program at SRI, we decided to do some remote viewing with a person who was blind from birth. And what they described was exactly the path that someone took to go to a remote site based on all the feelings they would encounter, something blocking the pathway, the fact that when they got to the site, it was an uphill climb, and then the building was narrow and long because of the kind of sounds they heard were what they would associate with that kind of a building. So it was really interesting that actually we got a really excellent description of a remote site on the basis of somebody who had no visual clues or words to use in describing it.
We will move on to our next question from our experiencers. This one comes from Oak. Some experiencers are able to call in orbs or spheres of light. Is there any specific interest in these particular experiencers over others? And are there any theories, or can you speculate what these orbs or spheres of light are versus traditional UAPs?
Oh, I'm going to get in so much trouble for even trying to answer that one. What they are, let's start with that. Again, yes, I know of people who claim this ability. I haven't seen it myself. But that doesn't mean that I won't speculate. If anything, they certainly, whatever they are, seem self-motivated, right? And they seem intelligently controlled. Seem. If. And so, okay, that's fine. Let's say they are. Okay, well, what kind of object could do that, that if it passed through something wouldn't leave a trace? Or, could it pass through a window? Well, these things have been seen to pass through objects. Can they pass through metal? If they're somehow electrically composed objects, I would think that they wouldn't be able to pass through metal. But then we know of videos within protected environments where these things have been seen to show up. So somehow they did pass through it. So what is it? I don't know. I have no problem, though, imagining that consciousness can embody itself in a form of space-time or plasma, if that's what you want to call it, as a self-organizing principle and object. I have no problem with that. But I also have no problem imagining that it's kind of like, again, what Hal was talking about, where it's an advanced scout object that is controlled from a distance, maneuvered from a distance, and transmits information back to the controller from a distance. And just because somebody calls for it and it shows up doesn't mean it's magic. It could mean that the person driving it or running it is specifically looking for that kind of a signal because they know that person will see it when they call it and will interact with it. So imagine you're a species from the Andromeda galaxy and you're sending these probes through quantum wormholes or something to look at the humans on planet Earth. And maybe you've done enough observation without doing anything, without interacting, but now you want to see, okay, well, let's poke the monkeys and see what happens and who can see us, and what would they do when we do this, and what information can we pick up when we get near them. So it's kind of like you think of it as a anthropologic study. I don't know, I'm just making it up, but it's like Hal said before, until you can take the hypothesis off the table, all hypotheses are allowed. You can rank order them and say, these are the ones that I think are more important versus the ones below. And here's the threshold above which I can test. And here are the ones that are frankly ridiculous, like micro elves run the universe, unless you've done DMT. And people do think that there's micro elves running the universe. I've never done DMT. So I know, believe me, I'm like, so anyway, I just find it fascinating. I mean, there's too many pictures of them, too many videos of them that you can't ignore it. Doesn't mean they're real, but I just can't ignore it. And it's fun. I mean,
Garry, what have we learned about the ones that pass through the human body? So can you learn, because of the symptoms that are incurred in the person who's had them pass through them, can you learn more about the nature of the object itself, or the orb?
Well, one of the people that I think it's a well discussed case of an individual who had something like that happen to them. They did have scarring within their body, as seen medically, and this is a kind of, again, the reason why I like medical and materials is because I can go back to that person and take another X-ray of them or another CRT scan and see the scar and see there's a linear path through the person that showed that something happened. So what that tells you is that the object interacted with human physiology in sort of an electromagnetic manner that caused the scar. So that tells you it's not some effluvial, thing of matter or of objects that has no interaction with our universe. It interacts with things, so it's not like completely exotic. At least that particular case.
Interesting. Jim, did you have something you wanted to add?
So I don't know what they are, but there seem to be several different versions of them. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that. I mean, it's, the question actually brings up a lot of interesting connotations here. So, an experiencer summoning something is right now it's a fallacy that all we are is receivers and we are just sitting here being inbound antennas. But you don't forget, antennas go both ways. I mean, any antenna you buy, make or buy or whatever actually can transmit. So that we can transmit out information to the phenomena is actually quite revealing, because now if you can do that and communicate with it, you might be able to have a dialogue of some sort. So if they can summon this phenomena to happen, and actually, to be honest with you, if they can summon it, that means that you can have a much more controlled experimental laboratory where you can bring these things in. But just the ability to go out to something and communicate with something is significant.
Do you know of any cases, Jim, where verifiably, that you've seen people, or that you're aware of people having that ability to call them in or interact in that way?
So if Yeah, so I have, maybe 100. So again, I have thousands of these narratives, and it always starts off sometimes where they say, I sat down, I meditated, and I brought in all this information. So it seems that when people put themselves in a situation, they have the ability to do something that causes the experience to happen. And then, if there's a medical condition that happens afterwards or whatever, it seems that there are certain people that have the ability to create, like, there's a sink as opposed to, or a source as opposed to a sink.
And this kind of relates to the question from before about, will scientists be embarrassed by new discovery? Just in the last year or so, neurophysiologists have shown and proven that the alpha, beta, gamma, theta waves that we all know about are not just there because there's some side product of how the brain functions. They're actually there to organize how the brain functions. And information is passed from one area of the brain to another via the resonances. And so scientists are excited about it because it explains a lot. Like, part of it seems to be a clock that keeps the system running like a CPU clock. The other seems to be passing information back and forth, and it organizes how the brain is functioning. And we know of some individuals who claim to have abilities. Tyler Henry being one of them, for instance, who was hooked up to one of these uh, um, an EEG and
Hmm.
when he went into the state, I think it was his theta waves went off the charts. And he was receiving information. And so, for all I know, and Tyler, I apologize if don't take this the wrong way, he could induce a state that was comparable to a DMT experience. I don't know. So, or a state that we would want to be able to medically or instrumentally induce in somebody so that they could have such interactions. I mean, certainly meditation is. I wish I had the willpower to sit down and meditate long enough.
Yeah, well, it does appear to be a correlation. I know someone was interested up in Canada, a fellow by the name of Dr. Persinger, as to whether there was some functioning in the brain that could be measured when people were doing remote viewing. And so he had Ingo Swann come up to his laboratory and put on this helmet where they're measuring basically low frequency electromagnetic signaling. And so he did remote viewing, and they were measuring these signals, and they found that during the periods in which he was getting good results, the signals looked a certain way, and when he was not getting good results, it looked a different way. So he felt that he had come up with kind of a pattern of what works for remote viewing. But what he did was, to follow up on that as a test of the hypothesis, was to bring in other people, like student volunteers, and then he put the helmet on, and then he would induce that kind of brainwave activity. And it turned out they apparently did good remote viewing and experiments when that activity was being generated. So there does seem to be actual correlations between what we do, even as we move off into a paranormal area, and what our brains are doing.
Our next question comes from the Experiencer subreddit. How can experiencers contribute? I'm sorry, this is also from Long Jumping Lime 6571. I don't want to not say their name. Sorry about that. How can experiencers contribute towards healing the stigma surrounding the topic? Many of us have been treated unfairly due to our experiences, yet are amenable to open discussion with sympathetic parties.
Yeah, I'm really glad that this question is being asked because I think it's really important. And one thing I'm really concerned about now as I progress with my work is to find a way to give more of a voice to experiencers. And I made this comment at Soul, and we also covered this in the series, that experiencers need to be taken seriously and listened to. And I think gradually, just through that process, the stigma is going to lessen. And I think it is lessening. But I think there's some things we can think about, such as, how experiencers talk about their experiences. I think it's really important that, if there are really weird aspects of this that just can't be really known if they're true or not, and they're kind of inconsistent with other people, that you just try to focus on sort of the core elements of it initially to get it out there more. And I think, what's really important too that I want to share is that at the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University, the John Mack archives have now all been given to Rice, to the Archives of the Impossible. And there is an institute called the John Mack Institute that is directed by Karen Austin, who some people here might know her, and she was at Soul. And they're going to do a metadata study on all the archival material that they got from John Mack and Whitley Strieber and others. And it's going to come out in a couple of years, and they're bringing in top level scientists to help with this study. And I think that is going to make a real difference in terms of getting credibility for experiencers. I think we need more funding. We need more academics and others to get involved with this. And sometimes, as Garry said, it's often about funding. There's so many great studies that could be done, but who's going to provide the money to study weird experiences that people have? So I wanted to encourage your Reddit participants, because one of the questions is how can they get more involved in discussions? Well, the John Mack Institute, and with Karen at the helm, has a lot of experiencer discussion groups, and they also have support groups. They work with therapists who helps experiencers process what they're going through. And we had one of those therapists in the series in episodes 4 and 5, which might be of interest to the experiencer group people here. His name is Simon Bressler. He's an incredible human being, and he has a full practice, but he also gives a lot of his time to experiencers. So I talked to Karen before coming on here, and I just wanted to give out, invite people to contact the John Mack Institute who want to become more part of a discussion and a process with all this, and to find a community. And that all the groups together can kind of formulate ways that would be productive to become more public with this. I mean, Garry mentioned that a lot of the groups have been getting together and interacting, which I think is really important. But the experiencer community particularly needs to, coalesce and kind of formulate ways that they think would be best to bring their information out in a way that the society can handle it. It's got to be organized, it's got to be clear, it's got to be gradual, and we have to find a way to integrate it into the broader narrative, which has so far been just focused on national security and military things. So I wanted to give out this email address to anybody who might be interested in getting more involved at that level. And it's info@johnemackinstitute.org. info@johnemackinstitute.org. And you have to remember to put the E in there, which is John's middle initial. And I would encourage people to do that. And I just hope that I'm really behind supporting the experiencers and working hard to try to find ways to bring this into a more cohesive narrative that can be brought forward. And I think the experiencers have a lot to offer us. They have data. They have And that's what the study is going to find out, like, putting it all together and finding out what's repeated and what kind of data points are useful for further study. And so all of that needs to happen. And I'm very supportive of that. And I want to help that process as much as I can.
I want to just quickly add, we had Karen and the John Mack Institute giving a talk at the Saul Institute. And so I want to put out a bit of a, I don't know. There were people in the community who said that Saul was not interested in experiencers, and that I addressed the question earlier that the woo was, which I mean, frankly, couldn't be more ridiculous. We literally had Karen up on stage talking about it. I'm an experiencer, so I think this notion that not this but that, the circular firing squad that we so often see in diverse communities, really we need to lessen, because just because I'm interested in one thing doesn't mean I'm uninterested in something else. But I think the experiencers need to put forward a case for why something or some aspect of it should be funded. At Stanford in the medical center, we put forward cases of why certain cancers need funding, and we wrap a story around it. And then that becomes a dedicated funding objective for charity. And so, similarly, for the Soul Foundation, we're putting together projects that can give a donor a reason to, give money. Same thing for experiencers.
Right.
There's many kinds of experiencers.
Right.
It's not just like experiencer as one big giant package. There's, as you were alluding to, Leslie, there are subsets of them, any of which could be targeted. And there's wealthy experiencers.
Absolutely. You'd be amazed at how many people who are out there involved with this issue are experiencers. They just don't talk about it. So, the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University needs, they need support, financial support, and like everyone else. And so if there are people interested in furthering research on experiencers, the broad range, as you say, I think they're doing an incredible job and they're really worthy of support. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that I've done a lot of work with experiencers over the past 10 years. And what's great about it right now is that a lot of people, a lot of experiencers are coming out giving their story, but it always seems that their narratives are sometimes tough to read by other people because they always have that look of, okay, well, this guy is a little crazy and stuff like that. One of the greatest things is that right now the AI technology or natural language processing technology is available to take all these narratives and strip out the pertinent data. And so no longer is it a narrative from somebody that's they're sitting there writing after they've had this profound experiment or experience. It's actually from a AI model which has stripped out all the pertinent information and turned it into a really good, significant scientific data point. So having you guys, the experiencers, bring out all this stuff, but then having the tools that can turn that directly into scientific data without somebody's clicking off and saying, okay, that's not going to be useful. The models don't care because they can pull all that information out. They can make sense of it. So I think that we're at a crossroads here where the AI technology from like Facebook and Google and all these things are being focused in on experiencers. And now they're actually the ones that are creating the data. And that's the stuff that we've been using right now to pull out this information.
That's fantastic. That's just what we need, that kind of thing. And that's why, I haven't been able over the years as a reporter, I haven't been able to really report on many of these experiences because there isn't hard data. It's somebody telling a story. So that's why we need to get it categorized as data. And then it becomes more acceptable and more useful. It's so great. It's so great. Yeah.